Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The wind carries with it a memory, a whisper of ancestry veiled in time, echoing the cries and hopes of a people who once roamed freely in lands far removed from the coasts of West Africa. These are not just the echoes of African kingdoms and tribal lore, but a deeper, more ancient call, one that many African Americans today trace back to the ancient Israelites of the Bible. This spiritual journey from bondage to awakening is not merely a story of survival, but profound reclaiming of identity. The tale of the Black Israelites is not only one of history, but of spiritual reclamation, divine revelation, and an enduring quest for truth in the face of brutal displacement, cultural erasure, and systemic oppression. Long before the first European slave ships anchored off the shores of Africa in the 15th century, many African societies had developed rich traditions, languages, and religious systems. Among these peoples were tribes that some researchers and scholars argue may have preserved Hebraic customs and oral traditions stretching back centuries. From the Lemba people of southern Africa, who practiced dietary laws reminiscent of Leviticus and claimed descent from ancient Israelites, to Igbo groups in Nigeria whose customs, including circumcision on the eighth day and the observance of certain festivals, strikingly resembled those described in the Old Testament, there is evidence of ancient Semitic influence across the continent. Though the historical ties between these tribes and ancient Israel remain debated, the resonance of Israelite identity would prove powerfully transformative for those later enslaved and dispersed through the Atlantic slave trade. As millions of Africans were captured, shackled, and transported into slavery between the 16th and 19th centuries, the cultural and religious identities of entire peoples were violently disrupted. Yet within this forced diaspora, seeds of memory remained. Stripped of language, names, and religious practices, the enslaved Africans in the Americas found themselves submerged in a world that sought to define them not as humans, let alone spiritual beings, but as property. Christianity, as imposed by slaveholders, was often wielded as a tool of subjugation, with scriptures carefully selected to promote obedience and passivity. Enslaved people were taught that their salvation lay in submission and that their suffering was divinely ordained. Yet, amidst this spiritual manipulation, quiet revolution took root. Enslaved Africans began to identify with the stories of the Hebrew Bible not as abstract allegory, but as lived experience. The tale of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, the longing for Zion, and the cries for deliverance in the Psalms resonated not as distant history, but as prophecy. The enslaved began to see themselves in the Israelites, not just metaphorically, but literally. This spiritual alignment laid the foundation for a new awakening. By the late 19th century, long after the legal abolition of slavery, Black Americans began to articulate this identification with Israel in more explicit and organized ways. In 1886, Frank Cherry, and later, in 1896, William Saunders Crowdy, both former slaves, founded the first identifiable Black Israelite congregations in the United States. Crowdy, a Baptist preacher who claimed divine revelation, began preaching that African Americans were the true descendants of the biblical Israelites. He established the Church of God and Saints of Christ, emphasizing Torah observance, Sabbath keeping, and moral uprightness. Cherry, meanwhile, proclaimed a more apocalyptic vision, arguing that God would soon judge the nations for their mistreatment of his chosen people, Black Americans. As the 20th century unfolded, the spiritual fervor of Black Israelites gained momentum. In cities like Harlem, Philadelphia, and Chicago, new congregations arose, blending elements of Judaism with African American Christian traditions, as well as teachings from the Hebrew Bible. The early 20th century movement saw figures such as Rabbi Wentworth Arthur Matthew, who founded the Commandment Keepers in Harlem in 1919. Matthew promoted Hebrew literacy, Sabbath observance, and the wearing of traditional Jewish garments. He also fiercely advocated for the recognition of Black Jews within the wider Jewish community, though his movement was often marginalized by mainstream Jewish institutions. For many Black Israelites, the journey was not only theological but political. The 1960s civil rights movement gave new urgency to questions of identity, justice, and divine purpose. Leaders in the Black Israelite tradition began to frame their message in more radical terms, linking their ancient identity with the fight against racism, colonialism, and cultural genocide. The idea that Black people were not merely survivors of slavery, but descendants of God's chosen people offered a powerful counter-narrative to centuries of dehumanization. It provided a theology of empowerment, dignity, and resistance. In the latter half of the 20th century, the movement diversified. Some groups, such as the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, led by Ben Ami Ben Israel, migrated to Israel in the late 1960s and 1970s, establishing communities in Dimona and other cities. These communities embraced veganism, communal living, and strict adherence to Mosaic law. Though initially met with skepticism by the Israeli state, they were later granted permanent residency. Their presence in Israel today continues to challenge the boundaries of Jewish identity and the politics of race and nationhood in the modern Middle East. Meanwhile, in the United States, other Black Israelite groups embraced more militant and separatist ideologies. Some emphasized the fall of Babylon, a symbol for Western colonial powers, and awaited divine judgment against oppressors. While some of these groups drew criticism for extremist rhetoric, the broader movement remained rooted in a deep hunger for identity, dignity, and truth. The diversity of belief and practice within the movement is vast, ranging from Torah-observant congregations who seek peaceful coexistence with other Jewish communities, to more outspoken street preachers proclaiming divine justice and Black liberation. This spiritual awakening also intersected with the rise of Afrocentrism and Pan-Africanism, both of which emphasize the reclamation of African identity and history. Black Israelites found resonance in the idea that their ancient heritage connected them to a time before colonization, a time when they were rulers, prophets, and priests in communion with the divine. The Hebrew language, biblical festivals, and temple customs became vehicles for this reclamation. Through them, the descendants of the enslaved sought not only spiritual enlightenment but cultural resurrection. In the 21st century, the legacy of the Black Israelite awakening continues to evolve. With the advent of the internet and social media, Black Hebrew Israelite teachings have reached global audiences, sparking renewed interest and debate. Some critics challenge the historical and theological claims of the movement, pointing to the lack of archaeological or genetic evidence linking African Americans directly to ancient Israelites. Yet proponents argue that faith, tradition, and historical continuity provide a deeper truth than Western epistemology can fully comprehend. They see in their journey a divine pattern. The same God who led the children of Israel out of Egypt is leading their descendants out of mental and spiritual bondage today. What began as a whisper through the chains of slavery has grown into a chorus of awakening. The journey of the Black Israelites, from a trauma of the Middle Passage to the spiritual renaissance of today, is not merely one of religious identity. It is a powerful assertion of humanity, memory, and destiny. It is a testament to the resilience of a people who refuse to let the fires of history extinguish the flame of divine calling. In reclaiming their ancient identity, Black Israelites have given voice to a spiritual truth that continues to inspire, provoke, and challenge the world to reckon with its past and envision a more just future.